Welcome, everybody who's joining us today for this webinar on planning a zero waste event. I'm here, I'm Jenny Mish. I am the Executive Director of the Sustainable Business Council, and we're really excited about this first step in our major series on moving Missoula towards zero waste. And I am very pleased to have joining me today to help present this webinar, Jeremy Drake, who is the Education Program Manager at Home Resource. So this is Jeremy. Jeremy and I are going to go through about 25 slides with some sort of general tips about organizing zero waste events, and then we'll leave quite a bit of time for questions and answers and discussion. We have some really very knowledgeable people who've signed up for this webinar, so the discussion period should be very interesting. And we're going to have several, very interesting Missoula-specific topics that will arise during the presentation that we'll do, and then we can discuss those things further. You all are currently muted, and you'll be staying muted during our presentation, and then, but you can type questions in at any time, and we can get to them at the end unless, we can squeeze them in earlier, and hopefully we'll get everybody involved. So this, again, is event planning with zero waste. Today is February 18th, 2015. And event planning with zero waste is an important component of moving a community towards managing waste so that we close the loop and reduce unnecessary wastes and recycle what we can. So I think we'll move on now with thanks to the Sustainable Business Council, of course, and Home Resource to our first slide.
Great. We're going to turn off the video so you guys can focus on the information and not our smiling faces. So just to advance, we click that.
Okay. So what we're going to cover is an introduction to what zero waste is and what zero waste events look like. And then we're going to go over a logistics and planning section focused on recycling and food and paper and decorations. And then we'll talk more about how to really engage people and help people's behavior change, including in enlisting guests and volunteers. And then we're going to wrap up with a brief bit on how you know whether you've succeeded and how to assess your success. And then we'll have a discussion period.
And just before we go any further, if anyone is having trouble hearing us, or having any technical difficulties, then please use your chat function and let us know. Thanks.
So
we're going to start with talking about zero waste. So what is zero waste? It's a goal, really. It's a principle. It's an idea, and it's grounded in some pretty fundamental stuff. One is to emulate natural cycles. Maybe some of you heard of circular economy. Maybe all of you have heard of circular economy. But the notion of zero waste is that everything becomes input, all discards become input for another cycle, whether it's a biological cycle, such as when we're doing composting, or a technological cycle, such as recycling. So those two are essential when we're talking about zero waste events, recycling and composting, as ways to manage the discards. Zero waste is bigger than that. It's a lot of it's about upstream, making changes upstream so that we're designing the goods that circulate through society to minimize toxins and to minimize waste before it's even created. It's grounded in a principle to conserve and also recover the resources that go through our system. And finally, it's really about this loop, the circular economy, and it is not about burning, incinerating, or burying in a landfill the items that end up as discards. So this bottom line here, I believe, comes from the Zero Waste International Alliance, who is the only internationally peer-reviewed group to agree on what zero waste is. And it says, implementing zero waste will eliminate all discharges to land, water, or air that are a threat to planetary, human, animal, or plant health. So that's kind of what we're shooting for. That's a framework for what we're going to be talking about in terms of implementing zero waste events. And this is an image from EcoCycle out of Boulder, who's been a leader in developing zero waste concepts and programs in the US. And this is an image about what a zero waste economy looks like. And it's a little bit more of a description of what I talked about, gets into more detail, goes into production and jobs created from waste avoidance or zero waste economy. So this PowerPoint will be available online afterwards. So if you want to go and look at anything in more detail later, you can.
So now we're going to move into what a zero waste event means, which is a subset of the much bigger zero waste economy. So hopefully we will touch on most of those other aspects of a zero waste economy during the SBC's Moving Missoula Towards Zero Waste Month. A zero waste event can be of any size. We have a couple of photos here from some large zero waste events in Pittsburgh. On the left, you're seeing the aftermath of the Pittsburgh Marathon in 2014, and you're seeing some volunteers sorting some of the bags that were gathered during the event. That huge bin in the front right, bottom right there, those are all paper cups that are all fully recyclable and have been gathered. And so that's kind of a large scale picture. The event on the right is also in Pittsburgh. It's called the Big Pour event, and it was in September of 2014. And the diversion rate for that event was 92%. And these are events with like 15,000 people. So a zero waste event, this is a trend that's happening around the country. You know, event planners all over the country are wanting to reduce their carbon impacts, reduce their impacts on the environment, and getting on board with zero waste as part of that strategy. So again, zero waste is a goal. 92% is pretty impressive. And, you know, we are aiming for the highest percentage that we can achieve at any particular event when we do zero waste event organizing. So there are a lot of different types of events, of course, that can be managed in terms of waste, where you know, planning for a diversion from the landfill and reducing wastes that need diversion or landfilling, it can be beneficial. Here's an image from an Ohio event, which was a Kiwanis Club pancake breakfast that diverted 98.8% of their resulting materials from the landfill. And of course, a lot of that was food, but the final amount that went to the landfill was 1 pound and 4 ounces. They served 447 people, and so that's still you know, not a tiny event. You can also aim for zero waste at your own, like, house parties or birthday parties or smaller gatherings. It doesn't have to be a large event in order to make this a really valuable part of the event, you know, a way to help people in your community get more interested and knowledgeable about how to avoid contamination and sort and recycle and reduce wastes. So our presentation today is going to kind of tend to be more focused on larger events, but we want to acknowledge that there's all different kinds of events that can be planned with zero waste in mind, and that the scale, of course, matters a lot in the planning process. So I'm not going to read each of these benefits of zero waste, but there are a lot of different benefits of zero waste events, and so I wanted to help identify some of them and say that, our communities want us to be moving in this direction. Our communities want less pollution, and that's been true for a long time. So, there's sponsors who care, there's vendors and attendees who care, who want the environmental awareness and the behavior change. And the benefits of to our communities of diverting recyclables and compostables from landfills and reducing greenhouse gases. And there can be reduced costs as well in terms of landfill hauling costs, depending on the event.
So as we get deeper here into what a zero waste event looks like, what we're really talking about is what are people going to be throwing away? The best strategy is to make it so that no one's throwing anything away. And that would be using durables, say at a house party or an office party. That means plates and cups that are actual plates and cups, not single-use disposables, stuff that you'd wash and use again. Cloth napkins, for example. So we're going to talk about some strategies for doing that on a larger scale for bigger events. But for now, let's talk about your plan for recycling. So at a small scale, imagine what you have that folks are going to be throwing away, and set up for source separation so that you're not mixing all the stuff together in one bin. You get your recyclables in one place, your compostables in one place, and the stuff that you can't recycle or compost in another place. So that top image there is a great example of that. At a larger event. For a smaller scale event, again, you probably want to collect the recyclables and take them to a recycling center yourself at the end of your party. If you have the option to compost in your backyard, maybe you know a friend who has a farm who would be willing to take some food scraps. That's something that you would figure out yourself. So at a larger scale, it's a bit of a different story. Say an event at Caras Park. Lots of people coming and going from all different egresses and places to enter and exit the park. And so they're going to be all over the park, and you're going to need to accommodate people where they're at. And so the best way to do that is to set up multiple zero waste stations. And a guiding principle for zero waste planning is that you need to have a level playing ground for discards. That means you can't have 20 garbage cans in only one place where people have the option to recycle or compost. For every one garbage can, you need to have the option to recycle and compost if that's what you're going for. And that's typically a great trio. Those three options have been tested and over and over again, and that seems to work the best. So offering these three bins at each zero waste station reduces potential contamination because people can put the right stuff in the right spot. At that scale, you're probably at the end of the day going to have more recyclables than you can fit in your Outback. So you might need to contract with someone who can take those away for you. There are people in the community that provide that service. And another way to ensure that source separation happens and that you do not have contamination is to have what trash talkers or zero waste ambassadors, monitors, people who are stationed at each zero waste station who can be the face of your zero waste event and explain to people when at the point of discard what the plan is, why it's happening, and how they can participate and do the right thing. So some tips for making this happen. Put the zero waste stations at convenient spots. High traffic areas are a great idea. Easy to read signs are really crucial, especially if you're not going to have volunteers as ambassadors at each station. Pictures are great. If you know at your event what the kinds of stuff are going to be offered by vendors that are going to be recyclable and compostable, putting pictures of those things on a sign is priceless. People have been doing signs for zero waste events and have found that if you can equate the stuff that is in someone's hand with a picture on a sign, then your chances of avoiding contamination are really high. You can use consistent colors. You can show and show the images of waste types for each bin. So the idea is to make it easy for everyone to participate and let them know that this is not a burden. It's easy to do. Which leads us to something that's a little less easy to deal with, particularly in our community, and that's food scraps. In Montana, 13% of our waste stream is food scraps. That percentage is higher in communities that have higher recycling rates, but that's still a pretty significant chunk. And the EPA says that 13% of our nationwide greenhouse gases are due to food in the growing and the manufacturing, the transporting, and the disposal. So we want to avoid food scrap, the wasting of food. And we can do that in a variety of ways. If you have, depending on your event, you can use food recovery and work with the food bank to get food that's still edible, keep it out of the waste stream and actually put it to use. But if it does need to be disposed of, then people around the country are figuring out how to do that. A lot of communities have commercial composting facilities, much like EcoCompost in Missoula, that accept food scraps and food soiled paper. And that's popping up everywhere. It's definitely a national trend, and that's the direction that we're moving as a country. And it's a direction that it seems like we're moving as a community here in Missoula. EcoCompost doesn't currently accept food scraps. It's possible that they could in the future. There are other solutions that are available. A lot of people compost in their backyards. There's community gardens. I know for one, the Corso offers the bins that are in the community garden at the Corso complex on Russell. The residents of the apartment complex can use those. So there are composting options. If you have a garbage disposal, you can put food down your garbage disposal and into the wastewater treatment system. That is a solution. But we have a little ways to go in Missoula, and I think there's some momentum toward having a larger scale food scraps collection and composting infrastructure set up. So bottom line is it's happening, it's coming, and we're on our way to getting there.
Thanks, Jeremy. And I hope you all are appreciating that Jeremy brings a lot of experience from, he used to do work in the Southern California area and has hands-on experience with a number of zero waste events. So I'm appreciating his input from that. Obviously, in smaller events, it's going to be more practical to gather the food waste and either compost it yourself or like Jeremy mentioned, put it down a garbage disposal, which can then become food for bacteria for breaking down the wastewater. And also they can convert it to methane. Convert the methane to energy to run our city's wastewater division plant. And maybe that will become more viable for restaurants and commercial kitchens. At this point, when you're organizing a smaller event, you still, or an event of any size, you want to be able to estimate the quantities needed as accurately as possible, particularly for perishables like food, so that you reduce the amount of waste that is going to be needed. So getting RSVPs helps with that. You can also reduce food waste and packaging waste by buying in bulk. Serving finger food, and planning for how to dispose of leftovers, whether you take them to a food bank or give them to attendees. You can make it fun by inviting your guests to bring their own utensils, and make a game out of it, or provide a little incentive. If you are going to use throwaways, of some kind, or single-use packaging in a smaller event, use paper and foil wrap instead of plastic wrap and plastic bags. And we're going to talk more about that issue of packaging coming right up here.
So this is kind of heading back into the area of planning for a large-scale event where you'll have vendors, food and beverage vendors, contracted to come and serve people at the event. The bottom line here is that as the event planner, you are the customer and you can ask for what you want from your vendors. And if what you want is to plan for zero waste, then you can make that request of your vendors. So you can request that they use reusables whenever possible. They can request that they choose the most recyclable single-use disposables available. There's kind of a hierarchy here. Paper and wood are compostable readily. Foil is typically recyclable. Typically, compostable plastics are good because they're not made out of petrochemicals. They don't necessarily compost. They definitely don't compost in a landfill. Some do compost in commercial scale composting facilities. Plastic, typically recyclable, generally needs to be pretty clean. Ideally, it's clean to be recyclable. Styrofoam is bad news at this point. It's not recyclable in Missoula, and it's really ugly when it gets into waterways. The way that the technical term is expanded polystyrene (EPS). It's basically plastic that's been puffed open with air. And so when it gets into a waterway and it starts to degrade, the air slowly escapes. And so you'll find that, particularly in an ocean environment, styrofoam occupies the entire water column at different stages of degradation because the air keeps it afloat to some degree. So styrofoam, bad scene. Please try to avoid styrofoam at all costs. And ultimately, all what that you want can be negotiated in a vendor contract as you're planning. Here's an example of how that has really worked well for an institution. The UC Davis, UC Davis has criteria that caterers need to meet to be approved caterers for campus. And this is a few of the 15 criteria that they have if you want to be an approved caterer at a UC Davis event. So they choose reusables where possible. They use compostables. They buy in bulk. They provide their own compost and recycling. They compost the food scraps. They donate leftover foods to charity, and on and on. So as an institution, it's possible to adopt policies that will push you and your organization towards zero waste.
And one of the things that we are providing as a resource as one of the resources on our website, on the webinar page on the SBC website, is a special events planning PDF from Stop Waste, which is a really excellent document, and it provides some sample contract and policy language that you might want to look at if you are working with vendors. In Missoula, we have a couple of SBC members who are caterers. Bravo Catering and River Song Gourmet are both very committed to trying to find ways to reduce zero waste. And so, obviously we're biased because they're SBC members, but I want to say that you can talk with any vendor or caterer about your requests and negotiate a contract. But you may need to educate them. A lot of vendors in Missoula are under the impression that the health department requires single-use beverage containers and that they can't be refilled. But we have a letter from the health department that I'm just going to flip to it here, that is also available on the website for your use, that explains that there really are two principles that that govern how to make sure that food containers and beverage containers are safe in Missoula. And one is the principle of proper handling, and one is the principle of sanitation between users. So proper handling means that if this fellow down below here at the Roots Fest, who has his reusable Roots Fest cup that the MDA provided as part of the Roots Fest, wants that refilled with beer, the vendors need to be prepared to do proper handling and make sure that the portion that has been in contact with his mouth doesn't come in contact with, the service, the tap that is pouring a refill. And that's a pretty simple behavioral change that most vendors should be able to make and do all the time in restaurants when they're refilling glasses and things like that. And then the second principle is the principle of sanitation. If this guy wanted to have his friend use that cup, then it would need to be sanitized, which would probably require indoor facilities, which are a little harder at an outdoor event like the Roots Fest. But you can see over to the right, the Roots Fest's recycle zero waste station that is set up to collect in the three categories. The Missoula Downtown Association that handles I think upwards of 70 events a year at Karas Park tries very hard to make sure that those events are as environmentally friendly as possible. And all of the events that are organized by the MDA do have a recycling pickup service and a plan for reducing single use when possible and things like that. But the MDA is also leases that space to some lessees who don't necessarily engage in those practices. And since Karas Park is owned by the city of Missoula and sort of managed by the Missoula Downtown Association, we've begun some conversations where both of those parties are in principle very interested in seeing Karas Park move towards a zero waste future. And of course, one of the keys to that is going to be finding a way to make use of our food waste, our food scraps locally. But the other really big piece is to educate our vendors about single-use plastic containers especially, and how finding ways to reuse them, encouraging people to bring their own containers to events, and encouraging people to ask for refills instead of tossing it and getting a second one or whatever. At this point, that's kind of state of the art, and event organizers can be a really, really significant part of the process by educating vendors, and we're trying to provide support for you to do that.
So wrapping up the portion on, there we go, vendors. These are just a few questions that are good to think about when planning your event and securing vendors or caterers for your event. So bottom line here is ask for what you want. If you want to have a lawn free of ketchup packets and empty mustard packets, then ask for bottles of condiments that people can use on their hot dogs instead of single-use ketchup packets, for example. Refillable water bottle stations, another great example. So there's lots of questions to ask, and just ask for what you want.
Thanks, Jeremy. Obviously, decor is an important part of a lot of events, making them fun and decorative. There's lots of ways to do that using reusables. We've got some great rental companies in town, Eastgate Rental and others. But you can also be really creative in lots of ways. The picture at the right here is from the SBC's Food Shed celebration from last September, where we used glass jars for vases for flowers that, of course, were then composted at the Peas Farm. And we printed our invitations on recycled paper bags, and we used LED lights to light up the pavilion that we rented. And and it fit really nicely with the theme there. We were able to use place settings that we didn't use any single-use containers for that whole event, and everybody loved it, and it helped to really create a theme and a sense of place that people really appreciated.
Excellent.
Finally, if you're going to have rewards and gifts, think about making them carry that theme as well. Obviously, paperless meetings and conferences are becoming more popular all around the country, and I think that the ways to do that are becoming familiar to a lot of people. Using online options and encouraging people to use their devices. You can always hand out flash drives that are all preloaded if you have a lot of materials to share. And if you are going to use paper, use it strategically and sparingly, and be aware of which papers are recyclable and which ones can't be. The really bright fluorescent, dark, and metallic papers usually contaminate the loads of paper gathered for recycling and then require extra bleaching, which means that, it adds costs and basically undermines the process. So how you set up your meeting, how you plan it, how you communicate with people, creates expectations and makes a really big difference in how people participate in the event and how they feel about it, and then how they engage.
So a zero waste event is an opportunity not just to have an awesome time celebrating whatever it is your organization or institution is celebrating, but it's an opportunity to have an awesome time engaging people in the cultural change that we need to realize zero waste. And so we can invite event goers into this process, have them be a part of it, and have them feel like this isn't something that is being imposed upon them, but something that they are contributing to and helping to make happen. So one way to do that is to provide incentives for reuse. As Jenny mentioned, you can bring your own cup to events in Missoula, according to the health department. That's totally kosher. So you could provide incentives for people to bring their own cup. You could have a raffle. You could, on the kind of more tactile side of things, you could set up a game where people sort the compostables from the recyclables and from the trash. You could have have a section of your event that features sustainability or focuses on waste reduction practices. You could invite a flash mob for collecting all the stuff that's accumulated at the zero waste stations and compiling it at a central location. You can have a mascot like this bat here, who is, I guess, the zero waste bat. You know where that's from?
Yeah, that's from Texas. This is a Net Impact Club from
Probably
Texas.
From Austin, where they love the bats.
And up in the upper right, we have a Sustainabee.
Okay.
As well, which is, our SBC mascot for a number of things, but works great for zero waste.
Great. So if you are taking the zero waste challenge at your next event, then you're gonna need help. You can't do it yourself. You need to help on the front end and on the back end. People should know, who are coming to your event, should know that it's going to be a zero waste event, so it's not sprung on them when they arrive. Let them know that zero waste is important to you and that it's a goal for your event. Here's on the upper right, there's a kind of a sample message that could be given over a loudspeaker, or it could be somehow put on a sign or something, just letting folks know that the goal of the event is to divert waste. Maybe you put a number on it, and encourage them to use the zero waste stations or the resource recovery stations, whatever you want to call it. It's up to you. You can brand this whole thing however suits your organization and their messaging. It's an opportunity to educate while you enlist people. chances are, if you get a group of volunteers to come help out, they may not know anything about zero waste. So they'll be learning as they help make it happen. And providing as many opportunities to make it fun as possible is definitely always a good way to go.
Yeah, so basically every event attendee is a volunteer because they're engaging in waste behaviors, and with the ways that you make it fun and educational and encourage them and to make it easy, they're learning new practices that can carry over in other parts of their lives. And your volunteers are another really, really important part of the team, because the volunteers can help your eventees engage in a way that makes them feel great about participating in the environmental goals, and however you convey it as part of your event theme. Help them feel great about achieving the goals that you've set for the event. And in order for volunteers to be really effective, they need to understand, the different materials so that they can tell people, for example, the aluminum foil is generally recyclable, but if it has a significant amount of food on it, then what that does is creates a health hazard for the recycling workers, who then are dealing with decomposing organic matter. And so aluminum foil is recyclable if it's relatively clean, but if it's got a bunch of food on it, then it needs to be put in a different place. So if your volunteers know these kind of details and can educate along the way and do it in a fun way that's with goals and incentives, that'll be great. You're going to need volunteers at each stage of the event, and we've got a photo here of a volunteer, sorting through the waste that's been accumulated afterwards. And that may not be the most glamorous job, but it's a really important part of the work as well. And so the two roles of being ambassadors to really help engage your attendees, and also be knowledgeable and help to do the sorting so that when it leaves your event site, it can be really utilized well in the waste stream afterwards.
And it's of critical importance if you are collecting compostables and you're going to be taking them somewhere to compost, that there's not contamination in there, because no one's going to want to have plastic bottles and wrappers in what they're accepting as compost. So, or
paper, like everything has to be.
If they want food soil paper, then that's okay. One little tip for doing that is using clear plastic bags, so that you can see without having to stick your hand in there if there's any contamination. So that's just a little tip
for the collection bags.
The collection bags.
Yeah, that sounds like a great tip, Jeremy.
Yeah.
Thanks for that.
Sure.
Yeah, contamination is really a key theme, and I want to connect the dots there with the more you can do it preventatively, by creating your zero waste stations where your attendees are putting them in the right place, so that somebody like this gal doesn't have to sort it as much afterwards, and then where it goes to, the folks who work there don't have to sort it as much afterwards. That is really what is a key principle to making a really functional recycling stream. So as much as can be done up front, the better. After the event, of course, the recyclables need to be, we've just been talking about, collected and sorted and delivered. If you want to have some measure of your success, you're going to need to have some way of weighing or estimating the amounts collected. You can, of course, donate leftover food. Take photos during and after the event, so that you've got a story to tell, because that story can be really valuable as part of your branding for your organization and for your event, and building momentum.
Excellent. So after your zero waste event takes place, how do we know what happened? What are the signs of success that we can have? There's a excellent resource on the PDF that's included. It's page 15 of the post-event recycling worksheet from stopwaste.org, and it has a lot of great metrics.
I'm going back to the.
Okay.
Do you want to?
Yeah. Let's go back there for a second.
Okay.
It has a lot of great metrics for what you might want to consider tracking in your event. So, yeah, that's that. Which one is it? Maybe not that one.
Here we go.
All right. So
Kind of covered it.
yeah, that's it really. So once all that's done, then what's left to do? You get to celebrate your success of your first zero waste event.
It's not showing.
Not showing. Okay.
So
Technical difficulties.
But the bottom line is that then you get to celebrate your success.
Yeah.
And we, fortunately, whatever technical difficulties we're having, we are now at the end of our slideshow. So that's very convenient. Okay, so you're seeing a celebrate.
We're celebrating.
So we're celebrating. Yay! We made it.
We made it to the end of the PowerPoint.
That's great. Okay, and then actually, before we go into the Q&A, which we're about to do, I want to just make sure that everybody's familiar with what's coming up for April 2015. The SBC will be producing a 40-page online guide about moving Missoula towards zero waste with tons of great information and articles and maps and diagrams. And so the table of contents is available on our website, and we're going to publish a printed 16-page condensed version that'll be inserted in the Independent and available at events. We're doing a community calendar of events with dozens of events around the community. So if your organization would like to sponsor an event, as of this morning, the calendar of events, the Towards Zero Waste calendar is live on MissoulaEvents.net. And you can, it will also be printed in the Towards Zero Waste guide, and we'll be promoting those events and having the Towards Zero Waste guides available at them. So you can sign up to provide a free event as part of it. It could be a tour or an open house or whatever it is that your organization, if you have an event that's a Earth Day event, we're working with MUD to make the Earth Day celebration at Karis Park part of Zero Waste Month, and we'd love to have you involved. This webinar today and our calendar of events and our Zero Waste Guide are all free to everybody in the community, but of course they cost things to produce. We are incredibly grateful for our sponsors. If you'd like to be a sponsor, we would love to have you. And if you'd like to just be a member of the community who appreciates what we do, would appreciate a donation to support this work, because it's important work. We feel like it's work that the community is hungry for. And I also want to thank, just before we go into Q&A, I want to thank Jeremy and Home Resource for helping this webinar to happen, and also thank, we're here at the Loft of Missoula that is helping to sponsor this event by this webinar by providing a space. So now we're ready to go into questions and discussion. If we can
turn on some mics. Yeah.
And see if we have any questions or comments that people have submitted, or if you'd like to, how do we do this? I think you can raise your hand. And I see we have 13 people on the call.
Unmute.
And we can unmute you if you have, oh, there's some comments. A comment, this is cool. Just like, oh, PowerPoint came and went.
Let's see. Bill, I see you sent some chats here.
Thank you. So Bill knows how to do the chat.
Let's see if I'm going to try to unmute each of you one at a time. So
You're all coming on.
Well, you know what?
With us.
Maybe that's not a good idea. Let's try the raised hand option, because that could get really noisy really fast.
So
we're looking for raised hand.
If you'd like to, or you can type a question.
Yep, type a question.
Or you can raise your hand. Where is the raised hand raising option on people's screens? There's to the right. There's a hand lifted
hand
up.
Icon.
A hand icon.
Yeah.
You can just a question.
Questions.
Oh, no, the hand icon is the one. You can do either one of those.
Hands raised. We got 0 hands raised. All right.
So we want to have a discussion with you.
Any questions? Oh, I see a hand. Whose hand is it? Okay, now that we have a hand, we get to figure out whose hand it is. Here we go, Bill Pfeiffer.
Go, Bill.
Let me unmute you, Bill. Thanks for working with us, everybody, because this is our. Hey, Bill, you're live.
All right, can you guys hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay. So if the arrow is pointing down on the hand, that actually means that your hand is up. So
Oh,
I
thanks
just
for that
pointed
tip.
that
Excellent.
out. So I just wanted to ask just a question about compost. Uh, I'm new to composting, and I've talked to Jeremy a little bit about it in the last week. But uh, what are what are the concerns with different food items in compost? I know that some composters are really specific about what types of food are in their compost, and could you guys kind of talk about that a little bit? Do you have any knowledge on that?
Yeah, I mean, it really depends on who's going to be doing the composting. So, if if for instance, of just a hypothetical, if Eco Compost decided, you know what, we're gonna accept all food scraps and food soil paper, they are at the scale and have the technology to handle everything, all meat, cheeses, the whole gamut. If you have a friend who has a small farm and he wants to help out and do some composting, he might be a little pickier about what he wants to um, get from you. So it really depends on who you're working with as the composter. Does that
Okay.
answer your question, Bill?
Yeah, a little bit. I'm just kind of wondering, just with our event as we're moving towards this large event, um, just whether, I mean, obviously we're going to have to find a source for the compost. I'm not sure how much we are going to generate. Waste wise, it could be a lot. It could be more than, a small user would be able to handle.
Right.
And yeah, so I'm just kind of curious, of how we might be moving towards that. I mean, obviously we want to compost what we can, uh, but we just need to have a place to take it. And
Yeah, exactly.
I've been told, oh, no lemons, in the compost, no meat products in compost, and you definitely answered some of my questions, but I
I,
just want to make sure that if we do collect this information or collect this stuff, um, I guess we'll have to kind of ask whoever we try and whoever's going to be the end source, the end of that
Compost.
that cycle,
yeah.
Yeah.
what they want.
That is the bottom line. I think one of the things that the Sustainable Business Council is aiming to do is to really increase the public awareness of the need for a food composting solution in our community, and how much people really care about it and want that to happen on a larger scale than the backyard pile. There are a few other examples around town of places where people have invested in options. Like Dining has a machine that can turn the food waste from the student cafeteria into input that can be used and is used at the Peas Farm. And it's an amazing machine, but it's very expensive, and not everybody can do that. So what we want to do is highlight the unmet needs and really encourage small scale composting to proceed wherever people can do it. There's no reason why restaurants can't have their own compost and gardens, and that happens in lots of places. We just found out that there's a compost project happening at Hellgate High School.
Mm-hmm.
So there's a number of different organizations around town that are interested in having a better solution to this, including the folks who run Karis Park. And so the idea of feeding our food scraps through the wastewater system has some appeal because there's already an existing widespread collection system, which is the sewer system, but it doesn't necessarily make use of the organic value of that compost in terms of recovering the carbon value and feeding those nutrients back to help grow new things. So just want to highlight how important it is to keep asking for what we want and inviting in more innovation.
Yeah, and tapping the resources that are in the community, like Eco Compost. Maybe it's worth asking. Hey, is this something you'd be interested in helping out with?
Mm-hmm.
Because they compost the solids from the wastewater treatment plant, if they can do that, they can pretty much do anything.
Generally speaking, what can be composted in terms of organic matter is a function of, how of the temperature involved. So the big commercial facilities have higher temperatures and can handle more things like bones and meats and things like that because they can sterilize them. Yeah.
Yep, that's a great point. That's why the big facilities can handle a much more complex organic waste stream, because they do have time and temperature requirements that they're required to meet for health and safety reasons, and they have to send every load of finished compost for testing before it can be made available to the public. So they're held at a high level.
And of course, that means higher costs, which makes it harder for a community like Missoula, to invest in that kind of a facility. But that doesn't mean we can't do it. We have to have the demand and the research and move forward. So thank you, Bill, for that question. Really appreciate it. I think it's one that a lot of people share. Anybody else have any comments or questions?
Oh, we got some more hands raised here. Okay.
Oh, yay, look. Hi, Emmy.
All right. So, Emmy.
Emmy Kodama.
Hold on. You're on, Emmy. Hi.
I am unmuted. Okay. Can you hear me?
Yes. Loud and clear.
Okay. So kind of riffing on that same topic, I'm curious because I have been to events where there were collection spots for compostable, silverware and plates and cups and everything, but I don't actually know what became of those things, and I don't know who is in the webinar, but Garden City Harvest, I have been to events like the Peas Party where they are collecting those materials, and I'm curious whether anybody knows more about that. I know the university's SOMAT machine, at least the last time I talked to them, which was a couple years ago, but they told me that they had attempted to process a bunch of those materials with their SOMAT machine, and it had really damaged the machine. So I'm just curious what things there are that work that are being used in the community.
Well, since we don't have a large-scale commercial composting facility available right now that's accepting food scraps and compostable food ware, that stuff is probably ending up in the landfill, like the forks and spoons that are made out of corn and potatoes and stuff like that. That's just an assumption. I don't know. I haven't ever seen that stuff break down in a backyard composting situation. Mm-hmm. Wooden forks, that kind of thing. I don't know if anybody's going down that road, but that would compost in a smaller situation. Anything that's heavily engineered is probably going to take a heavy-duty composting facility to manage it. So the simpler the better, and encouraging no disposables, like edible serving trays or something like that, like lettuce cups and stuff like that can help just avoid that problem altogether.
Or even less with like a napkin instead of a whole plate and things like that. Yeah. I know that a lot. Yeah, go ahead, Amy.
I had another question too, which is not directly related, but the answer to it may be in that letter that from the health department that you showed, and actually I could probably just ask our deli manager, but I'm curious whether there's a divide in terms of being able to use people's own cups and plates between whether you're serving them whether they're serving themselves, because it seems like if they're bringing it from home and the, like in your example with people bringing their own cups and the server being able to either reuse somebody's cup that they've already used once themselves, but it's the same user, or bring it from home, if they're doing the dispensing and they can control the sanitation, whether that is part of what determines whether people can use their own plates and cups or not?
The letter doesn't address that question directly, but the letter is specifically addressing commercial food service operators, and says that the handling procedures that are necessary in order to, protect the public health safety require that the handling is done so that there isn't contamination, so that there isn't a risk of passing of germs and bacteria. And so my guess is that they would prefer to have trained food handlers be doing that rather than the guests themselves, if there's a choice. So the letter doesn't address that, but it does give you a contact that you could follow up with that on that.
Yeah.
Uh-huh.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Please share with us whatever you find out, because I feel like there is still some gray area in there that we would love some clarity on.
Yeah, and I know that there's a lot of confusion back on your previous question about compostables. There are many Missoula, well-intentioned businesses and food service providers that, are using compostables because they want to be doing the right thing and they believe that is going to, result in less landfill. And part of what we need to do is to help educate about that. So thanks for that question.
And
thank you.
Yeah. So just to wrap up what Jenny was saying, and this may be obvious, but we generate more landfill waste if we don't have the facility that can handle those There's still single-use disposables. They're still going in the landfill until we. Thanks, Demi. So we have a few minutes left, and Karen.
Karen Temkin. Hello, Karen.
You're on. Karen, do you still have a question?
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Hi. I just wanted to say great presentation. Very informative. One of the things that I wanted to ask about is the focus on actually reducing the amount of
Karen? Still there?
Is this a pregnant pause, or did we lose you?
Hello? Can you type your question?
Hold on, let me try. Maybe it's on our end. Okay, I've unmuted you again. Karen, are you there?
Karen,
we lost you.
She had a great question. Can you hear her?
I can hear her.
Oh, that's
can
weird.
you? Okay, so we can't hear her, but Stephanie can. So Stephanie, tell
there are other.
You're back.
Okay, we can hear you now.
Oh, you can hear me? Okay.
Yes.
I was just wondering if there's additional suggestions for how to reduce the amount of food that people take on their plates, for example, because it's obviously there's lots of solutions that you can do with once you have the food waste and the composting and the items themselves, but it's always better to reduce the amount of waste to begin with, right?
Yeah. So what kind of context are you thinking of, Karen?
Well, I mean, it could be large scale or small scale. I noticed, I don't know if you heard this, but I noticed that you guys had on there things like finger foods, which I thought was a great idea. But having hosted several large events previously, it's just always been an issue that people tend to fill their plates and then eat a portion of it and then throw the rest out.
So is it kind of like a buffet style situation where people are filling their plates, or is it the vendor that's putting a huge portion?
It's actually both. And oddly, even if you ask a vendor to kind of go easy on the portion size, sometimes people will, when they get their plate, they'll even say, hey, can you put a little extra XYZ on there? You'd be surprised how many times that happens.
Yeah.
So I was curious.
Yeah. So there's a loosely affiliated network of restaurants around the country that started in Salt Lake City called All You Can Eat Cafes, One World Everyone Eats, that is really aimed at a whole restaurant business model that's aimed at reducing food waste. And when you ask for food there, they literally hold a spoon and say, do you want this much? This much? Come back for more if you need more, like to really encourage people and it's a very educational process. And I think that there's a lot of potential for much more of that needs to happen at all ends. I know from my past research that restaurants that have tried to reduce their portion sizes, find that has that doesn't fly well with a lot of consumers, because consumers are expecting to have large portion sizes, and so it's a challenging marketing issue, but it's a really important one. And I think you've got a really important point there, that there's certainly a window of opportunity in Missoula for our food service providers and for caterers and things like that to look at ways to kind of encourage people to minimize food waste by putting less on their plates, or by offering smaller amounts to begin with, and encouraging people to come back for seconds and things like that. So I want to acknowledge that we're at 2 o'clock, which was supposed to be the end time of this webinar. That's what we're doing, a webinar. Karen, did you have any last comments that you'd like to, if we can hear you? We can't hear you.
Okay.
Okay.
Thanks, Karen.
So thanks, Karen and Emmy and Bill, for your questions and comments, and for everybody for joining us today. And we are still available at the SBC and at Home Resource if you want to engage with us leading up to Zero Waste Month. Thank you for your participation today. Really appreciate you joining us on this webinar.
Thank you all.